Hey, it's Liz D'Alto, and this is the Untamed the Wild Soul Woman podcast. From body image, sex, spirituality, money and relationships, to motherhood, creativity, business, communication, and desire, Untamed the Wild Soul Woman is the place to come for real stories and powerful advice to help you reclaim and redefine womanhood in the 21st century. Elizabeth D'Alto here, your host for the Untamed the Wild Soul Woman podcast, and two quick announcements before we get into the show today. If you are listening in real time, today is Monday, January 11th, and we are kicking off my newest program, which is called Freedom in 44. 44 days to befriend your mind, love your body, and upgrade your life. So if you're interested in that, the details are at untameyourself.com/freedom in 44. That's freedom, I-N, the number 4. All the details are over there, and we are getting started today with our healing mantras. It's a 44-day practice, and it is absolutely amazing. It's one of my favorite things I've ever created. So check that out if you're looking to do any of those things. Befriend your mind, love your body, or upgrade your life. Today is also the very last day to apply for the Untame Yourself Women's Leadership Council. If you have been listening to the podcast for the last couple weeks or the last couple months, you've heard me mention this several times. You won't really find a description or anything for it anywhere else on the internet, but in these announcements and in my quick little notes that I've posted here and there, because it's a super intimate process. We have 15 women enrolled right now. I'll probably end up somewhere around the 20 mark by the end of the week. So it'll be an amazing small group of women all over the world working through their biggest issues and their biggest excitements in the areas of health, wealth, relationships, and spirituality. So if you've got stuff going on in any of those categories, if you are feeling the new energy of 2016 and wanting to make this the best year of your life, have this be the most successful area and really redefine what success means for you and your life, apply for the mentorship. Worst case scenario, you apply and it doesn't work out. Best case scenario, you apply, we get to have a conversation, and who knows what kind of magic could possibly be in store for you this year. So the link to apply is untameyourself.com/mentorship. And now for today's show. Elizabeth D'Alto here, your host for the Untamed the Wild Soul Woman podcast. And today with me, I have Margaret Nichols, who, as you guys know, I don't usually give formal bios. You can go to her website, which is margaretnichols.com. It's Nichols. Margaret is someone who I met years ago in New York City through mutual friends of ours, Erin Stutland. I didn't know much about her, but I was like, I just like that chick. And then was it last year or the year before? We were both instructors at something called Soul Camp. And I went to one of her workshops. So among a ton of things that she does, and I wrote this down from your website because I loved it, she really is a teacher of spirituality, of oneness, of ultimate love, of all these amazing things. She studied extensively with like masters all over the world, including living in India for 6 months and many trips since. But what I loved what she wrote on her website was that she's all about grounded urban practicality. And so those of you who listen to the podcast regularly know that that is my jam, right? We are keeping it grounded. We are keeping it responsible so that we can live as spiritual beings in the 21st century as part of the world and not just, floating up out of our bodies, speaking language nobody can understand. And Margaret does that better than most, really. So I'm super, super excited to have you here. She interviewed me for her website a couple weeks ago. It was one of the most fun interviews I've ever done. She got me to share things that I've never even shared before about my own spiritual practices. So we'll link that up in the show notes as well. So Margaret, welcome.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
God, for those of you watching, she has this super beautiful background happening. Way better than my little bungalow here in Kauai right now. Gorgeous.
It's my living room.
Those of you listening will just have to imagine this, lots of beautiful colors. So I ask every woman the same first question, and then we just riff from there. What do you love about being a woman?
Ooh, that's a great question. I've listened to a bunch of your podcasts, and I don't remember that was the first one. I think I love being a woman. I love that we are so sensitive and intuitive. I think that's our greatest gift. I think that we have this way of sensing things around us and being able to operate in a world that's, I don't want to say it's different than masculine has, right? And so we can we feel more, and we kind of ingest more. I love that about being a woman. It feels like it's that softer side of things, and it's that, I always kind of think of it as the right side of the brain. It's more connected to that femininity, that sensuality, that we kind of bring that sensual to almost everything that we do if we're really in our feminine core. And that's the way that we kind of perceive the world. And I love that, and I'm very much about not making things too girly and pink and whatever. So to find that as I'm getting older now, to see how that's matured and is really more of a space of not just pom-poms and liang and blah, 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 but really this wisdom and groundedness and this you just kind of have eyes all over the place and you know what's going on all the time. I kind of love that, like a sixth sense about things all the time.
All right, I love this. So two things I want to unpack from what you just shared. The first one is, I know you work with men and women in your workshops and in your trainings and teachings, yeah?
Yeah.
Cool. So I'm going to ask you a question that people ask me all the time that you could probably better answer because you've done more extensive work with men. So when I talk about how women have intuition and, we're more sensitive, people go, well, don't men have intuition too? And my answer is, well, of course they do. What do you observe to be the difference in how women connect to, relate with, and use their intuition, and how men do it?
That's interesting. I think for men, it's more of a presence. And it's for a grounded guy, right? It's more of a presence, and their intuition is more of a gut reaction in the moment. They're always about action. They're, single focused. And so it's always about that, making the decision in the moment, where a woman is she's almost more visionary. She senses things ahead of time. She's the one that's worrying about Christmas in October and what are we going to do next year for our vacations and all those kinds of things. And so even when we're, if you're at a restaurant and guys are going to be like, what am I going to order? And a woman's like, I don't know if I like that there's a TV over there and I'm sensing the glare over here. But, you know what I mean? Like she's much more aware of her environment, intuitive about things that are kind of going around her and in the future, where a guy is much more about gut reactions and great decisions. And great businessmen are all about that, yes, no. Where a woman is more likely to be I don't know, and feel it out and take more time to make a decision. She's not going to be so active immediately. A guy is just going to be yeah, and it's going to be done.
Interesting. Super interesting. And again, nothing is black and white, right? Because I think the key thing that you said is a grounded guy.
Yeah.
And I loved that. In a minute, I'm going to ask you your definition of grounded, because I love, again, a lot of things that come up in interviews on the show, they come up all the time. But all it takes is for that one person to say it that one way for it to finally land for someone more deeply than it ever has before. So I'll ask that in a second, but I think that's the key, right? Because I've known plenty of dudes who are really indecisive, but it's because they're also really insecure. And it's because they really have a lot of self-doubt, and so they're not grounded. They're not solid in who they are, and that's a result not of being masculine, of just being like a human in a phase of your life where you're a little lost.
Yeah.
So what's your definition of grounded? How would you describe it?
This is a really interesting question. And for me, what I've seen in my personal relationships and kind of what I've seen in men in general, it might not be what you think, right? Because someone might think, oh, grounded is you have all your shit together, or you are that guy that can make a decision quickly or has all your money stuff in order. But I really think groundedness comes down to integrity. And I've seen people who are teaching leadership, and then don't treat their employees well. There's the core of who you are. That integrity is the most important thing. And I've also seen people where they're starting a new business, they're going through a divorce, their life is a mess on the surface. You might look at it and say, oh God, that guy's nothing is grounded at all. He's changing apartments, he's going through a divorce. But because his integrity is so pure, and the truth of who he is and the truth of what is right for him is so clear in his mind, that's the groundedness that I think should be most highly prized, and unfortunately isn't so much. We tend to prize the other things, the external things.
That's right. This is so what you're reminding me of. So I have a friend named Michael Fishman. He lives in New York City as well. And a really long time ago, he wrote a Facebook post about this. about how we really do. We judge the externals because we can't see someone's inner landscape. So someone might be so solid in their integrity, so clear in what's right for them, but because we can only observe what's going on the outside, we might think they're a wreck. But we have no idea how solid they are or how well they're navigating whatever the perceived storms are. What a great point. And of course, that applies to men or women. And as you were saying that, I feel really good. I had a crazy fucking year this year. I did so much. I traveled so much. And there were times when I was like, damn, am I all over the place? But I wasn't, because I was still me, you know? I was still navigating it. And there's always those moments of like new pieces of yourself being revealed and then integrated, right? Mm-hmm. So, see? God, hell yeah. I love talking to you. So I was just snooping around on your website a little bit before we hopped on. You know what, though? Let me go back, because I said there were two pieces of that. I asked you both. I asked you the man thing and I asked you the grounded thing. Just making sure, because I go off on tangents sometimes, and with no one to reel me back in, you never know. But we're back.
Okay.
So you were telling your story of how you were like kind of a disaster in your 20s. And similar to what we were just saying, you had a lot of the externals. Amazing career, travel, money, opportunities, clients, experiences, marriage, a lot of like good on paper stuff. Mm-hmm. But you said, I was acting out.
Yes.
This is something that's really present for me lately. Have you read the Neil Strauss new book, The Truth?
No.
It is a wildly honest, deep dive into relationship.
Oh,
so
great.
This is the guy who also wrote, have you heard of The Game?
No.
So The Game is a book he wrote many years ago all about pickup. He was like the guy who really like forged the path for pickup artists, how to like manipulate women, get women to sleep with you and things like that.
Okay.
And then at a certain point, the pickup guy decides, I think I want to get married and have a family. So he had to finally face and deal with all his shit. So it's so raw. He's going through therapy for like sex addiction and doing all these different things. It is just... It is raw. It is so open, and like the inner workings. He explores like the polyamory community, all this stuff. And it's funny because some of the people he like studied with, like we know them in California. It's like so weird. But anyway, one of the things that that he really talked about, it was like similar to what I was reading. It's like this acting out, this noticing where you get triggered. And it's no longer like adult Margaret responding, right? Mm-hmm. It's like 7-year-old Margaret or 16-year-old. And you know, that's what that acting out is, right? And as adults, we usually don't think of it that way. So I'm curious how you came to the place or even realized or stumbled into your path of seeking and study that like the acting out wasn't okay. Because I feel like a lot of people do it unconsciously. They don't realize it, or they accept that behavior and excuse it in others. Yeah. Does this make sense?
Totally.
Cool.
Totally.
All right, go for it.
Well, I mean, you know, that it's interesting because there's always that like point that you said, like that turning point.
Yeah.
And then but the letting go of that acting out, because those would be like, I call them spiritual kryptonites, like the things that like draw you into things that like that trigger you into going to that place that you don't want to go.
Yeah.
And you know, that took years to get rid of those things and to kind of see them in a different way. But I remember, you know, basically I was at the end of my marriage, and I was married very young. So I was married at 24. I was like the first person that I knew that get married. And like I talked to my ex-husband 3 times just this week. So like we're still super, super close 10 years later. But before we got divorced, like we were just the worst versions of ourselves. And there was one specific thing that I write about, like I write a line about it, I think somewhere in my bio. But I remember like his sister was running for Secretary of State of California. Okay. So it came from, so like a pretty big office. Right. And like we were at this political fundraiser, we're like all dressed up. And I was just so mean and vicious that I had a vodka tonic, and we're screaming at each other. And his sister's fundraiser, she's like, you know, running for this high office. And like, I was so delusional and drunk that like to scream with him and to cause a scene in this hotel lobby on the floor of like, it was in the lobby and like the event was right there. We weren't like apart from the event. Carpeted lobby. Remember it like it was yesterday. And we're screaming and I threw the vodka tonic on the floor. I mean, like, think about like like just the worst situation. And I was the worst version of myself. And there, I had like 1,000 stories like that. And when we broke up and we kind of decided that we were going to, split up and separate, it was just like a huge, huge, huge wake up call for me. And I went totally in the opposite direction. Like that was my first really big like spiritual deep dive where like, just inhaling the books. Like I couldn't, I stopped drinking for a while. I stopped doing all of that. This is still 2 years before I went to India for the first time. So I was just like way into that hole of self-improvement. Like it was like a month or two later, I went to like Tony Robbins, Unleash the Power Within for the first time. This is a decade ago, right? More than that. This is 11 years ago. And so it was just all of that was like, that's not okay anymore. And so I had to, if the pendulum was here, like let's say, of like the worst version of myself, yeah. I had to, not everybody has to do this, but I had to go over here. Yeah. So I had to go like into like the nun saint version of Margaret for a long time, just to get the clarity and the awareness around it, to be like, okay, that's not okay. And how can I integrate the things? And something that's interesting about my life, and not everybody agrees with this, but like, I still drink alcohol and I continued to drink. I'd go through many periods where I wouldn't drink for different spiritual practices and stuff for months at a time. But kind of in general, like I have not like given up drinking or anything like that. So to be able to kind of come back, and find this middle ground of, behavior and appropriate behavior and seeing all that stuff and not getting triggered by it has been like a big part of the path.
This is super great because, so for those of you listening, when she said the pendulum thing, she basically was swinging from one extreme to the other. And I think a lot of us can relate to that. And I know myself, in my own experience, I've had to do that too in terms of like movement. So like you met me when I was still doing fitness. And when I quit fitness, I had to like completely quit it. Not just as my profession, but like I stopped working out. And that was the first time. So I was like 29. Actually, that was right before my 30th birthday. So a couple years. And so that was the first time in my life, because I'd always been athletic. I'd always been active. I'd always played sports. I'd been working out since I was 12 years old. And so that huge piece, like an identity.
Totally.
This activity that I would do so many hours dedicated to my life, week in and week out, I stopped doing. And what a weird place to navigate without that thing.
Yeah.
So when you first, I'm curious, you said you went to Tony Robbins. I feel like that Tony Robbins is a lot of people's gateway drug into personal development, right? Because he's so well known. And it's so intense. It's like a good way, literally, to throw yourself into the fire.
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
What were some of the first couple books that you were inhaling that you grabbed?
Oh my God. Well, I mean, there was my first big person. Actually, Marianne Williamson was like my jam. And what I would do, I was a theater actress at the time, full time. And I remember like the summer that I was even in conflict. So I was still like in that spiritual path, but I wouldn't say that my first awakening had come. And that summer when I was most in conflict about my wedding, I would listen to her recordings, because she had like, I mean, dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of hours of recordings of her lectures. And I just remember walking up and down all these hills in Vermont and like constantly listening to her. And then right around then is when What the Bleep Do We Know came out. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie.
I haven't seen it, but I've heard of it.
Yeah. And that was a huge awakening for me. So then I went into all the books on quantum physics and all sorts of things. There were things like, I'm like looking over at my bookshelf, the ones that I still have a hold of. And Eckhart Tolle, like A New Earth hadn't come out yet, but his first book, Power of Now, was very big there. And then a lot of big yogic texts, because that was what I was very drawn to at the time. Just like the really, even the really early stuff, the Jiva Mukti stuff, and really interested in like the different yamas and niyamas, all the different limbs of yoga and all that stuff. So really kind of old school stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm super interested. Let's talk about yoga for a minute. So we live in a culture now where there's basically one limb of yoga that's highly recognized, which is asana, which is the movement practice.
Right.
And then a bonus limb of yoga, which is what you wear. That I feel like isn't or one of the original 8. As someone who's studied like the full spectrum of yoga, like I'm sure there are some people listening, because I didn't know this for many years, didn't even know there's much more to yoga than just the movement part of it. It's okay if you can't list them off the top of your head, but can you speak to what are some of the other limbs? What are some of the main like focuses of yoga that our culture right now, as it is, since everything is so commercialized, totally misses out on?
There's so many beautiful things. I mean, there's like, there's pranayama, which is all breath work. And some people will like incorporate a little bit of that. The main purpose of yoga supposed to be is meditation. So the main purpose, like with my practice, I practiced Ashtanga initially, and like I go in and out of it now. But like they used to say that you shouldn't even sit down to meditation before you can sit for 3 hours in lotus. So like really the whole purpose of asana is to prepare your body so that you can sit still and go in. So it's the meditative practices, it's the pranayama, it's all sorts of stuff about how to train your mind and body. And the thing is, I went too far with it. I went very ascetic with some of it. Like some of the things are like that you can't eat. It's a very simple diet. It's very, you're not supposed to like go out to the theater. There are things like that are all in yoga that I found were a bit too ascetic for my life. So I had to kind of come back from a little bit. But really all of the other stuff is like there's all sorts of teachings and practices that are more to do with meditation than they are with because that's really, yoga is union with the divine. And we don't know that when we go to Bikram, or when we go to yoga classes that are all about the physicality of it. But that's really about it. And really, if you go to really senior yoga teachers, and not that there's anything against like new crops of yoga teachers, because I have so many that are like friends and are amazing teachers and all that. But I'm talking about like old school people who might be a generation above us that have been practicing for 50 years. They'll all say the real yoga has nothing to do with asana. Right. It's everything about meditation. It's everything about that stillness. And the pranayama, there are some very simple breathing techniques that you can do very simply, and some of them are really, really vigorous. And it's almost dangerous to do them if your body's not clear, because it can bring up toxicity so quickly in your body that can be dangerous. So all of it is meant to be paired together. And unfortunately, like we really like the physical aspect of it and the Lululemon pants. So as you said.
Yeah. And what a great point to bring up that it can be dangerous. So I went to some breath work, some like group, some like friend thing. And again, a lot of this, you don't know what you don't know. So you're in an experience and you're like, I don't feel good. I went to this breath work thing that a friend of mine, this should have been my tip off. He met someone at Burning Man. So yes, my own judgment is rolled up in that one little sentence. But he met someone at Burning Man who was doing these breathwork workshops. And then so he like Skyped the guy in or something and had a bunch of us over to do it. So I'm like, all right, cool, let's go try some breathwork. And it was long. It was like an hour, and it was quite vigorous at certain points. And it wasn't during that I had any kind of like crazy experience, but days after, like 3 or 4 days after, I was still feeling disoriented.
Oh, interesting.
And I was like, it's just good to know. I feel like there's a lot, again, to come back to like grounded, practical, responsible teaching. Mm-hmm. There's a lot. And you also said something on your site about how you would never teach something that you haven't already practiced in your own life and seen the results in your own life and in other people's. And I think that's so important. And I'm similar. Like, I will always do something on myself and see how it works before I go teaching it to other people, because everyone's system, your emotional makeup, your mental makeup, any traumas or whatever, that stuff is just in the body. Yeah. It's scary what people are willing to just take a piece of something and go, oh, let me do this, having no idea what they might awaken in other people.
Yeah. And I'm a huge, I'm really big a champion on, finding expert teachers for things. If someone wants to dip their toe into things, then that's fine. But I can't tell you how many people I see that when they do have really serious trauma and that gets activated, and you're with someone who's inexperienced and they don't know what to do, or alternatively, even someone's like, giving a big lecture and they bring the energy up there and someone starts to freak out and there's not the support there to help someone. Like we really need to be able to have integrity about that with teachers and take care of the people around us and take care of what we're spreading.
Yeah, totally. So if a person is listening, like if they know they have trauma, like if they know they have stuff that, still comes up for them, and like it still gets triggered, like they know either they act out or they just know they have stuff buried that they haven't looked at. How can they safely choose what to participate in, or perhaps what path to begin the healing process, or even deepen, if they've already dipped their toe in, the healing process? What's a safe way to navigate what teachers they choose or what choices they make in their healing?
Yeah, mostly, if you're going into things like yoga or meditation, things that are guided and are gentler usually aren't going to kick up some big stuff. It's more when you have someone kind of going into something that's too advanced, because we all do that, and especially as Americans, we're all like, give me the boot camp version of so-and-so. And I really think the thing is to be gentle with yourself and allow yourself to go slowly. Because I can't tell you how many times I've heard in my classes and in things being like, but I want to be here. But it's like, yeah, but you're not. And the thing is, we don't value that where we are is perfect, because we're always striving to be somewhere else. You know what I mean? And the thing is, that perfection of the present moment is totally where it's at, no matter what our level of consciousness is or what we're going through. And if we could get that, if we could really get that and allow ourselves to be there, then everything would just like open up for us so beautifully. Yeah. But most of the stuff that you find, online and things like that is going to be, I would say, pretty benign. And then if you do want to go a little deeper, then just go to someone that's experienced, and people who have a lineage are like, will always list who their teachers are. They're very proud of it, and they're like, they come from this city and so and so and so. They like, I love this about you too, Elizabeth, because like you always give credit where credit is due. And so somebody that's not like that will tell you where they come from, and here are my practices. This is directly from my teachers. Here's where I amended it on my own. And the more experienced teachers, like, you can start making shit up when you've seen hundreds and thousands of people go through things and you've had an evolution of your own. That's when you can start to play with it and make it your own, And so just find those people that have that experience when you're ready to go deeper. And if shit's really coming up for you, I've seen some pretty severe cases, people that like need to go to treatment facilities and stuff. An experienced teacher is going to like be hard with you, and they're going to say, you need more severe care than this, and someone who's new might not know that. They might just try and throw like rainbows at it. And that's right. Not everybody's ready for rainbows right away, unfortunately.
Yeah, man. And I mean, this is the world. We live in the age of memes and social media and affirmations and motivational quotes. And there's a time and place for that stuff. But when someone is seriously in the throes of really deep emotional stuff, that's just not, one of my favorite sayings is, it's like putting whipped cream on garbage. It's really,
totally.
Really not helpful.
Totally.
So say a little bit more. I love, you really did swing the pendulum all the way over to, like, you use the word ascetic. If someone doesn't know what that means, can you elaborate on what that means for a second?
I mean, that just means I define it as kind of strict and very pure or clear. Like the yogic word they would use for it is sattvic, which means pure and clear. So like sattvic food, for instance, if you're a yogi and you're practicing a specific way, would be to not eat spicy food, to only use ghee because it's clarified butter, it's purer than regular butter, to avoid certain foods and to go to other things. And same thing, sattvic in speech and sattvic in interactions with other people, sattvic in your environment. That's why, like, one of my teachers, like, you, at the time I was a theater actress, and he's like, you shouldn't go to theater. And I was like so confused about it, because I was like, I don't understand, this is my career, how can I not go into a theater, right? But like, so that's ascetic, is really, it's almost a closing off from the world. And I have seen that, and I've seen, I've traveled a lot. I was just in Peru, and I saw a beautiful community of people there that had their own path with plant medicine down there, and that was great. But I was like, as I was there, I was like, this is amazing, it's beautiful, but this wouldn't be my bag to be in this community full time, because it's almost like you're disengaged from the rest of the world. And what I really am passionate about, and I know you're really passionate about this, is bringing these things together so that people who are practical, people who are ambitious, people who want to have families and lives and totally thriving businesses can have this super deep spiritual practice and not have to go live in a bubble somewhere where they're like, I just don't really want to be a part of the rest of the world. You know, not to say that everybody's doing that there at all, but, you know, I have seen that happen. So Satvik for me just felt too confining. And I went there and, you know, you feel great when you're not participating in a lot of the world and you're eating so cleanly. And after a while, if that's not like, and some people, that's their life, you know, they practice brahmacharya, which means no sex, like ever, not just for periods of time, like no sex. And like, that wasn't my path. You know, I tried it out for a while and it brought me some clarity. It was great. It's almost like living like a monk.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I kind of want to live in New York City. Like, I don't know if I want to be a monk. So
I like orgasms.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so this is really interesting because, so I'm wondering, what was the transition out of that back into, quote, the real world like? I always wonder, because I even notice myself, even if I just get like a couple days to myself or I'm like away and then I come back into like a more intense environment, or even, you know, for those of us who don't live with or near our families, it's like my mom, she'll joke like, stay in your bubble. Like I do, like I've created my life. I surround myself by things that fuel and feed me and nourish the way I want to live. But then when I go back to an environment that is not my ideal, it's still triggering, right?
Oh, totally.
And I notice like, it's like a good barometer for where I am in my groundedness, right? Is, can I go home and just be chill with my family? Or am I constantly getting my buttons pushed, right? There's almost like a fear sometimes. Like I remember summer of 2012 when I did my second Reiki attunement, which if anyone is listening who doesn't know what Reiki is, it's a form of energy work. I became so sensitive, more sensitive to other energy than I had ever been before. It was tough. It was actually kind of tough for me. I actually waited 2 years to even get my third one because I was nervous. I'm like, I'm already more sensitive now and it's not easy to deal with. Could I even handle being more sensitive? So whether it's an issue of sensitivity or assimilating back into like a regular environment, how was that for you?
You know, that's such a great question because honestly, that's such a lot of people don't talk about that. And it's such an important component of any of this kind of work because people, when they start to have this kind of stuff, they feel very discombobulated because all of a sudden they don't connect with the friends that they've had forever. And that causes a lot of conflict with them or maybe their partner. They're like, my partner's not on a spiritual path and I am and all that. So there's two ways that I want to answer that question. Number one, to specifically answer it, is not what you might think, is that when I stayed in India for the first months, for 6 months, I was at this job and I got back and I was living that ascetic life. So I was waking up at 5 a.m. to go to yoga and I would go to yoga and then I got a job, which I had never had like a job like ever, but I needed like some grounding there. So I got this job and my boss at the time, I was 20, I had just turned 30. And he watched me and he was like, watch me come in right after yoga every morning and go home at night. And he was like, this is the prime of your life. Like, why aren't you going out? What the hell, right? So what did I do after this like incredible ascetic, totally opening phase of my life? I had an affair with the boss, not an affair that either of us were involved with other people, but it was a secret because we worked together and no one else in the office knew. He was an alcoholic and a cocaine addict. And I had this crazy life for a time that I was like partying with him and then going the ascetic thing. I mean, it was like yo-yoing still. So I still had all this conflict in me of like these ascetic practices being like, this is what's right. And this other part of me being like, no, but I still want to have fun and figuring all that out. Now, finally, that all kind of fell away. And now it's, you know, definitely more grounded and aligned and there isn't any of that like major yo-yoing. But the other way that I wanted to talk about it is that with my family, you know, right now we're recording this, it's a couple of days before Christmas, and my mother and my sister are coming to New York for the first time ever in my life. And I am so excited about it. And I want to talk about that for a second because you mentioned, you know, your family and there's so much stuff that comes up around the holidays. And when I was early on in my spiritual evolution, like those first few years, I couldn't be around my family. So like December would be my year to my month to get gone. And I would go to India. I would go to wherever. I would go somewhere for a month to get, because also I was like, I don't want to be around the commercialism of Christmas. I can't be around all those parties. Like, I really needed to remove myself and keep myself in a bubble because I was so tender around my inner self, my true self rising. And I was so tender with all these practices. I knew that I would kind of like fall off the wagon.
Yeah.
And then slowly, I started spending more time with them, and then still the conflict would come up. And now it's just such a place, we still have conflict. We still, get at each other. We're not perfect. But the way that I am in it, and there's such a place of groundedness, and the way that like things don't stick to me anymore, it just allows me to be in a space where I can, create an environment that's just so generous and loving for all of us. And we all rise when someone can hold that space. And if one of us is trying to tear it down at any moment, then we just like pick ourselves right back up. And, and there's not holding grudges. There's not the whatever. So, but it's definitely a process, with all of these things. And like you said, similarly, even when you do a weekend workshop or a retreat for a week, that integration, like you need a couple of days, if you can't just go from that setting back into your life, there's always got to be some integration period, whether it's a few hours or a few days. But my first big one was really chaotic. I didn't do it well, but I didn't have anyone to guide me. I was figuring it out, and I figured it out all wrong.
Yeah. So, man, I'm so glad you brought that up and you spoke to the tenderness of it, because God, that is the best way to describe it, right? That state where you feel just like raw, and like things could hit you. And I think, like you mentioned earlier, that culture, like our American culture of like wanting the boot camp version or the accelerated version of everything. And that just doesn't work sometimes. And I think we can really judge ourselves. I should be able to do this. I took this course this weekend, but no, and it takes time. So I'd love to know, how many years did it take you to get to this super solid place where you are now?
Oh gosh, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, I would say it took a few, it took a few, but I mean, it's been a long journey because it's really been about a 15-year journey of spiritual study and all of that. Yeah. Right now I'm grounded, I'm clearer than ever. And honestly, everything keeps changing, because I would say a few years ago, my mind shifted kind of, and I stopped suffering in a way. But now, like everything in my, like as you elevate, everything's about energy now, and everything is about sensing energy in a different way and sensing it outside of my body, like really weird, like Disneyland magical weird things that, you can't talk about with everybody. Yeah. But like, then like the world is a playground, then it's magic. And that's a totally different experience than, worried about whether I'm going to fight with my family in the holidays, or, how my mind's reacting to things, or whether I'm going to lash out at somebody. Yeah. Then, in my own evolution, I've just also noticed, really operating from a place of totally with, not as a concept, but as a being, like, this moment's perfect. Like, this is exactly what it's supposed to be. And like, I trust 1,000% in the universe. What's in front of me is what's supposed to be happening. So when something negative happens, if like I took a risk and it didn't pay off, and I disappointed or lost money, like there's not even a disappointment in that. There's just like, okay, well, that's the way it is, and it's not a resignation, because emotionally I think I'm more active emotionally, but there's that, things are so easeful these days that it's so beautiful.
I love to hear that. And even what you just said, it's not a resignation, because I think our culture also is super ego driven. And so we really see things in context of winning or losing, pass or fail. And sometimes things not going the way we wanted them to is such an enormous gift, because then it sends us down a different path.
Totally.
But so much of our personal pain and struggle comes when we want to beat ourselves up about that, when we want to fight against it, or make ourselves wrong, or make life wrong, or the circumstance wrong.
Totally.
Yeah, so interesting. So I've never done this before. I was listening to another podcast the other day, and I'm like, oh, I like when people do this. So kind of a lightning round of just like random questions.
Okay.
If you were to find a genie in a bottle and you got 3 wishes, just bang off the top of your head, what would be your 3 wishes today?
Today?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I've always wanted to go to one of those things like they have in Bora Bora where, you have that like hut on the water.
Yes.
Like have that and like bring all of my friends. So have an entire resort of like 100 people and it's just everybody I know and love.
Yum.
I think that I would want to, if I could end human trafficking for women and children around the world, like that is just a cause that's so close to my heart. And, it causes me such pain. And I think it'd be to wake up New York City, because I think that if we could get New York, and obviously I think this is the entire world, but really for people to live from an awakened space and state, then the trickle down to the rest of the universe would be so, so, so big and massive, and the way that the financial world would change and all of that, it would just be a completely different world.
What fun answers. Good answer. Because it really, and I've always wondered if I was a little geocentric, and maybe I am, but same. Like, a lot of people think, like, so goes New York, so goes a lot of the rest of the world. So
yeah,
whether people agree or not is totally fine, but I'm with you on that one. I agree with you. Who's your favorite character in a movie and why?
Oh, that's a good question. Oh my gosh, that's a hard one. Amelie. I love that movie, Amelie. Have you seen that?
No.
Oh my God, you haven't seen Amelie?
No.
It is the most, you have to go. You're going to love it. I'm so excited for you that you haven't seen it. I am so excited for you that you haven't seen it.
How do you spell it? What is it?
Amelie. It was out a few years ago. It's a French movie, but it was huge. It was huge when it came out. And it's this very magical, whimsical story, and it's this French girl. And honestly, I haven't seen it in so long. I kind of want to see it again now. Maybe I'll watch it tonight. But I love the magic of it. I love how it's, I don't even want to say fantasy, because I feel like all of that stuff is possible. And she's so heart driven. And when you're driven with your heart like that, that magic can unfold. So I absolutely love it.
Awesome. And then what's your favorite book you've read in 2015?
Favorite book I've read? I'm trying to think. There's a book that I read that's a non-spiritual book. I'm looking at my shelf. It's Where'd You Go, Bernadette? Have you read that book? It's like a novel. Okay. And I think that was my most fun one, because it had been so long since I had not read a nonfiction book. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And when I read that, I was just like totally engrossed in it. It was so fun. I was at the beach. It was like a perfect beach read, because it was also very smart. So one of my problems with like beach ready fiction is that when they're not written well, I kind of like get a little upset. And it's just like a very, very, very smart book, and it totally took me on a journey, which I love.
I love that. I did that too. In the last year, I started reading fiction again. Mm-hmm. And still, some of it's like historical fiction. It's still like kind of meaty, but I'm with you. And same. I cannot read bad writing. I just can't.
No, I can't.
That's why I never actually read any of the 50 Shades of Greys, because a couple people who I know and trust were like, the writing is so bad. So
it's terrible.
I didn't even bother. I know. So cool. All right. And so last question we'll wrap up with, I do pretty much ask this to everyone. Is there anything I didn't ask you on the topic of like Untamed the Wild Soul Woman, or connecting to your true nature or your divinity, or just like anything that you would like love to share that I didn't ask you?
Everything that I'm so excited about right now has to do with like the divine feminine, women rising, and all of that. And so I also just came back from, funnily enough, we were talking about him earlier, but Tony Robbins, I did his Date with Destiny, right? For a week. So it's like a week-long course. It's more intense. And it was amazing. It was great. And it was very awesome. But and he talks about the masculine and the feminine, and it's a big component of it. He's great in the way he teaches it. But the structure of it was so masculine, and I just like really want like women to start to champion themselves into doing things in their own way, and to not be putting on the pantsuits and taking the briefcase and being like, we need to be aggressive about our work. To like,
so this is what you get when you decide to shoot things on vacation, like in your cottage. Like sometimes the landscapers show up in the last 5 minutes of your podcast interview. So anyone listening, I apologize, but there's nothing we could do about it. So just deal with it. Tune into Margaret's voice. Tune out the weed whacker. Keep going.
That's hilarious. Totally hilarious.
This is life, you guys.
This is total life.
We are not ascetic. We are in the world.
Well, in Hawaii is not so bad.
No.
But for women to like really to own that for themselves and to
Yeah.
start understanding that that's okay and that that's what's necessary right now, you know, that there's and that we need each other and to support each other
Yeah.
and to stop like all the competition and aggression and all that and just love on each other.
My Michael is here with me. He just went outside and asked them to just not do that for like 2.
Oh, that's so sweet. I love that.
I love that, and obviously, you know, I'm right on there with you. That's interesting. I went to Unleash the Power Within with Tony Robbins in like 2012, and at the time, I was still in fitness. Actually, I was still running my life in a very masculine way, and then afterwards, I was like, oh, I can't. He's so great, but exactly what you just said for that reason. It's so structured. It's so masculine. Like, I needed something that felt a little more woomy.
Yeah,
a little
totally.
more like welcoming and soft that I could like land in and like kind of dissolve a little bit. So cool. Love that. So, all right, everyone listening, if you want more Margaret in your life, which I can't imagine why you wouldn't, go to margaretnichols.com. And if you're in New York City, for the love, go to you run them weekly, right? For the most part?
I've been running a Diksha Oneness Blessing meditation for 9 years every week.
Every week. So tell them when and where they are. I mean, the information is on your website, but
It's on my site, but it's every Thursday, 7:15 to 8:15 p.m. And it's on it's 27 West 20th Street, number 306. So it's on my website, but it's right in the Flatiron District, right in the heart of downtown.
love, and I can't wait. I very rarely come to New York anymore. I needed a long detox from New York, but I would love to come. I would love to come. So maybe I need to coordinate that at some point next year when I'm in the city. So thank you so much for being here. It's really, it's very alive. I love talking to you. I feel like we could just like sit around and like talk spiritual evolution, awakening, and all that stuff forever in the fun way that we like to do it. So this was super, super great. And do you have anything else going on? Any courses, any programs, anything else we can share?
What I have launching next year, so early May, it's Divine Femme is my new course. So it'll be divinefemme.life.
Oh, Divine Family. And you said that's coming in May?
That's going to come in March.
In March. All right, cool. So we don't have to wait that long, but keep an eye out for that too, everyone. So, all right. Enjoy your holidays with your family so much. First time in New York City, and we'll talk to you later.
Thanks, love. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
When you're in an experience with someone where you know, like, you would feel sensitive or you would take on their stuff, which is usually around, like, intense negative emotion, right? So whether it's anger, sadness, or something dark or something hateful, a good mantra for that is yours, not mine, or even just not mine, not mine, not mine.